Hello, and welcome to Book Solid, New Canaan Library's podcast for adventurous readers across all genres. I'm your host, Kathleen, a collections librarian.
I'm your host, James, a reference and instruction librarian.
And I'm your host, Kat, a children's librarian.
And today we are discussing The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley.
So, before we get started, we're just going to give a little bit of a spoiler warning. I'm going to give a summary of what happens in the book.
Yeah, if you haven't read the book and you're interested in reading it, this is a book with some twists and turns, so I would recommend reading it before you come back and listen.
All right, so The Ministry of Time takes place in a near future in which the government of the UK has stumbled across time travel and is in the early stages of experimenting with the technology. One key piece of information they'd like to figure out is how time travel affects the human body, and to test this, they've gone and grabbed a few people from across the timeline right before their historically recorded deaths, in order to avoid messing with causality. They then assign a person to monitor their acclimation to the present. These expats from out of time include one First Lieutenant Graham Gore of the doomed Franklin expedition to the Arctic from 1845, who's paired with a bridge that just so happens to be our narrator, an unnamed woman who is working for the government as a translator. As the two try to navigate the gulf between time periods, antiquated beliefs clashing with modern sensibilities, the trauma of displacement and loss, anti-smoking laws, and the ever-present monitoring and deceit that is demanded by the project, Graham and our narrator slowly begin to recognize that they are attracted to each other. While they chart a course through this unexpected relationship, suspicious and sinister things are occurring around the expat project, and our narrator will be forced to reckon with the secrets, spies, double agents, murder, and in the end, come face to face with the last person she'd expect in order to protect herself from an increasingly uncertain future. To get into the real spoilers, there are time travelers all over the place. In the future, the Ministry wields great power and influence, and it unsurprisingly did not turn out well for a lot of people. The Brigadier and Celise, two people from the far future in which London and most of the world have been destroyed by either climate change or war, they've come back in time to try and change the future through assassination and information gathering. One of their targets is Adela, who's the narrator's boss, who they hold partly responsible for how things turn out. This is because Adela is actually our narrator, but from a future in which she and Gore got together, had a child, and both became high-ranking ministry officers. She is here to stop the Brigadier and Celise from trying to stop the ministry from rising to power. Both versions of our narrator are shocked to learn that the ministry has ordered the killing of not useful expats, and after a confrontation, Celise is killed. Adela and the Brigadier are seemingly vaporized during an attempt to destroy the time machine, and our narrator gets fired. While some of the expats were killed during this debacle, Gore manages to survive but feels deeply betrayed by the ministry and the narrator and goes into hiding. The book ends with the narrator thinking about trying to find Graham after receiving a postcard from him, leaving the possibility of reconciliation on the table. Whew. Time travel books, pretty complicated. What did we think?
So I know this book was on a lot of sort of best of the year lists, and I enjoyed parts of this book a lot. I think there's some really strong elements of this book, and there are other parts that I did not really enjoy. To me, it was pretty uneven overall, and the experience of reading it was pretty uneven.
I agree. I think one thing that we'll get into a little bit later is just the number of genres that this book combines. And I think for me, and this is pretty typical of any book that is a real genre mash, I always find myself gravitating towards some, not liking others as much. So it ends up being a slightly more uneven read maybe than something a little more straightforward. So while I liked a lot of the ideas and I appreciated how much was going on and how unique it made the book, I do think that that was also a little of the reason why it didn't work as well for me.
I agree with both of you. I think uneven is the best way that I could honestly think to describe this book as well. There's just so much when it comes to relationships between characters, to historical exploration, and the idea of immigration and the expats. There's a lot of stuff in here that I love, but there's a lot of stuff in here also that I just feel like maybe it didn't have enough time to develop, or it was introduced too late in the book. Or maybe the structure of the book got in the way. There's a couple things that really just kind of got in the way of me fully enjoying this book. So I do think this is kind of more of an uneven read in my opinion.
So let's talk about genre a little bit then, because I feel like when I got into this book, or when I started it, I assumed that I would most gravitate towards the science fiction elements, which at the start of the book, there's sort of this red herring thrown where they're like, we don't need to worry about how time travel works, which is kind of a red herring to throw you off the scent of some of the twists later, now that I think about it. And I thought that would be what I enjoyed. I thought even the thriller elements would be what I enjoyed. But actually what I loved about this book was like the slice of life romance. And as soon as it tried to make me care about a conspiracy, I wasn't interested.
Yeah, I'm fully in agreement with you as well. I think that one of the structural problems I have with the book is that it does introduce you to the kind of idea of time travel as, yeah, we've got that. But then the book makes it very clear that the narrator, who's our point of view character, is not allowed to be basically anywhere near this time travel machine or know anything about it. So the reader also has no idea how this works until I think literally the last maybe 2 chapters of the book, where people come in and then start explaining to the narrator how things work. And it's just a lot of information very late in the game. So I was expecting to, like Kat, be a lot more drawn to the science fiction elements, but because they were introduced so slowly at the start and then all at once at the end, I also found myself kind of being more drawn to the idea of like the relationship between Gore and the narrator, the idea of like being a person out of time trying to acclimate to
the friendships between the
Yes.
expats. I would have read so much more of that. There's a bit in an interview with the author where Bradley talks about how one of the things she really hated about writing from her narrator's perspective, because she's so fixated on Gore, her love interest, is that you see a lot less of Arthur. So she actually went and wrote a short story for herself about Arthur and Graham going on a vacation together because she missed seeing him in the book, which was like, my narrator wouldn't care about that. And I was like, I care about that. I would have read that in a heartbeat. I love the friendships between the expats. That to me is like one of the strongest parts of the book. The dialogue in particular I found so witty and snappy. And so when it became very exposition heavy towards the end, I just was like, I liked the book this was a few chapters ago more.
Right.
What did you think, Kathleen?
Yeah, well, so I should point out that we chose this as our romance pick.
I think that was the right call.
And yeah, I think when it comes to the way it delivers on the science fiction or even the historical fiction, like there are all those elements there, there are thriller elements. But I think at the heart of it, the core of this book is more of a romance than anything else. Although I am curious, when we think about this, do we think it would appeal to romance readers? Do we think it adheres to kind of the genre conventions?
It's interesting because it doesn't have, the typical HEA, or what's now more commonly called an HFN, happily ever after, or happily for now. But it does have the sort of it's a third act breakup rather than a second act breakup, in that the characters are split at the end and there's only the possibility of reconciliation. I thought that was the right ending for the book, but I do think this is more of a gateway to romance as opposed to being something that would appeal to the core audience of romance readers. Like, if you read this and really loved just exploring the relationship, like me, where I just enjoyed really exploring the relationship between our narrator and Gore, then you might actually enjoy romance more than you think if you haven't tried it before, rather than it necessarily being a book that would appeal to a romance reader, if that makes sense.
I think definitely. Yeah, I think structurally the choice of not having a strictly speaking kind of happy ending to it, but just more of an open-ended one, makes a lot more sense with the themes of the book and even the time travel structure, because there's sort of this open-ended possibility of maybe more time travel in the future, something that she can communicate to her past self. And these things, I think, work for me, but they aren't maybe as satisfying, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that focusing on the romance was the right choice for this book. I do think that relationship was the key draw to just the story. I always loved reading about the narrator and Gore trying to cohabitate in their government-assigned housing, dealing with near-future climate change, trying to acclimatize to, society. There's a lot going on.
This book is a warning about climate change in a lot of ways. And one thing that was really interesting upon my reread in preparation for this podcast was I found that the elements that were discussing climate change that were the most compelling were like the everyday elements. Mm-hmm. So like when the storm hits and they have to like use sandbags, for example, or when there's the heat wave and time sort of compresses and they're not allowed to use much AC, was so much more gripping and tender to me and like grounded than some of the stuff that happens in the third act, which isn't to say there's not a place for that kind of climate fiction. Absolutely, there's kind of apocalyptic climate fiction. But I felt that the earlier parts were more compelling to me personally. Should we talk about other things we liked about the book before we get into some other discussion?
Sure. I really liked... So I have come to a discovery through this book, which is that I believe that I am unfortunately part of the group of people who enjoy reading about doomed expeditions to the Arctic now. I was fascinated every time the novel took... It would occasionally take kind of brief forays back in time from Gore's perspective as he's trying to survive while knowing in the back of his mind that they're all basically dead. Just harrowing, horrific stuff.
Yeah.
But I could not look away.
If you enjoyed those sections and you haven't seen the TV show The Terror, which did inspire the author, you should go watch it. I found those sections a little boring because I already knew all about it. So on my reread, I did fully just skip them, to be honest.
Understandable.
On my first read-through, I read them very dedicatedly, but she did put those there for people who are unfamiliar with it. So I'm happy that this didn't open you necessarily to romance, but it opened you to enjoying doomed Arctic expeditions.
I'll take it.
Unexpected. Well, one thing I think we've talked about how we did gravitate more towards the slice of life. So I will say though that there were some sci-fi elements there that I was quite taken with. So I do want to just mention those a little bit. And one of the things that I was particularly interested in was this idea of here-ness and there-ness that was developed in the book. I thought that was really fascinating. A unique concept that I hadn't really encountered anywhere before. So basically that these people from there and then taken here, I guess is how you would think of it in the book, they are able to kind of calibrate how much they are situated in the present and may or may not show up on things like, CCTV or something. And there are just all these concepts, I think, with the way that they acclimate to the future, their future, that is really thoughtful and interesting, and sort of the way that they think that language, the ministry specifically thinks that language will help them to become more present in their own time rather than the time that they were taken from. So I thought all of those concepts were really thoughtful, and I did think that it added to the story for me. But as you guys mentioned, I think there is a lot of slice of life stuff too. I will say that, as much as I think this thrown together cohabitating scenario is part of the fun, one of the things that was most fun to me is when the characters were separated but talking over the phone. I thought that was a great one. There's the scene at Christmas where they're talking and they're kind of sharing things about each other, and it's not like that direct connection, but I think you still feel so much emotion in that scene, and it's kind of nice to have like something like the divide between them, but then just see them draw closer. It's very Austinian almost, because it's very period drama, and that's because Gore's from that period, so he writes her that text that reads like a letter. Yeah. And it's very charming. Like, I think I would be so charmed if someone wrote that to me. And that's, I think, one of the strengths of the book is that despite Gore's failings, which, like, he's from a time where, like, sexism and racism looked different than they look now, and certainly were much more open, let's say. And that's something he has to adjust to in the present. But he still remains this kind of charming, amiable figure. Everybody wants to be friends with him. And I felt that pull towards his character while reading. I believe that the authors mentioned in interviews about how in some of these like out of time books, it feels like there's a temptation to just kind of make the person who is out of time act like kind of a bumbling idiot. And none of the expats in the book act like they're buffoons. They are real people trying to adapt to a real, if completely unexpected situation to varying degrees of success. So I felt like these were fully realized characters, and Gore, absolutely, because you spend so much time with him and the narrator, you can see how he's responding to things like I would maybe expect someone from that era to do so. He's putting on the stiff upper lip kind of thing, and he's like, don't tell me about this anymore. It's like, oh, you've been to the moon? Not tonight, tomorrow. One of my favorite moments, actually, is when he learns about Spotify towards the beginning of the book. And he's like, that was amazing, because they just pull up a song. And then our narrator is like, do you want to listen again? And he's like, that seems disrespectful to me. I think we need a little more of that, to be honest. Yeah. We should talk more about the other expats, though. I don't think we've talked about them much. Yeah, so there's a couple, they pulled them from different time periods. So Gore is from 1847, from the Franklin expedition. There's Captain Arthur, who was extracted from the Battle of the Somme during World War I. Margaret Kemble, from 1665, she was extracted from the Great Plague. And then Lieutenant Thomas
Cardingham, who was from 1645, extracted from the Battle of Naseby, and Anne Spencer from 1793, extracted from the French Revolution.
And really, we focus most on Graham, on Arthur, and Margaret.
Yes.
The other two are less present for different reasons.
I believe Anne disappears or something.
Yeah, she stops being read on cameras. I think it's implied that they kill her because she's not useful anymore.
Yeah.
But the ministry just kills her.
Yeah.
And nobody likes hanging out with Thomas because he's just not very pleasant.
Nope.
So we don't hang out with him very much. When I first read this book, I was just like, I love Arthur and Margaret so much. I would take 50% more of them. I think they're both so interesting. I love them both as characters. I'm very endeared to the poets of World War I, like Siegfried Sassoon. So it was very fun to see a character like that be brought to the present, especially one of my favorite novels is Regeneration by Pat Barker, which is about those poets. And then Margaret Kemble is just such a delight. I think her use of jargon from 1665 is so endearing immediately.
Margaret is great. Margaret is such a good character. Captain Arthur, you just wanna give him a hug. Yeah. They're just such warm characters. Their relationship with Graham is heartwarming. The narrator, you can tell that the narrator has a very special place in her heart for both of them. Just she likes them a lot, and it definitely transfers over to the reader.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the thing is, you might come for the romance or something, but it's so much of a friendship novel, and I think just like kind of those hangout scenes, like I just want to see more of those characters. I mean, I absolutely love Margaret. I could read a whole book about her, but I think for her to come from such a life that just seems so miserable and terrible, and she was like locked in a room or something when they took her through the time machine and everything. Yeah. And she's living her best life. Like, she really is having a lot of fun. And it's just so much fun to see.
Truly. So now we should talk about some of the, I guess, villains of the book? Not really villains. The ministry.
Complicated.
The ministry. Villains, yes, the ministry.
The ministry.
Yeah. I fully believe that they should have stored the time machine in the British Museum because they fully stole this time machine, and they should put it next to the Elgin Marbles as a more secure place. But it's interesting how quickly you realize, how early on you realize in the book, like they definitely didn't invent this because they have fully no idea what they're doing with this. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the book, that is fully confirmed. They stumble onto this thing, and it's just they got no clue what's going on. They're relying on like people coming back in time to tell them what's going on.
Sounds almost like people going to the Arctic and not communicating with people who've lived there to get advice on how to survive it.
Yes.
I think we wanted to talk a little bit about our narrator specifically, and her relationship to the ministry and her relationship with her alternate self, Adela.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. Adela seems to be someone who, she is someone who is not happy. The narrator asks her, "Are you happy?" And she thinks about it and goes, "No." And it's like, oh. I mean, because she is in a relationship with Gore in the future. They have a son
who hates them.
Well, he's a teen. That's what she says.
But he's a teen, yeah. And then she's also proud of him a little bit. It says in the book. So it's so interesting that this is a future in which the narrator kind of gets what she wants, but comes out unhappy about it.
Yeah.
And it does cause, it caused me to pause and think like, how do you get to a healthy relationship where you're happy from this kind of situation? Because it is a really fraught situation where the power dynamics are wildly out of balance.
It's worth noting, something we haven't talked about before is that part of our narrator's job is to surveil everything Graham does. And she's in a way his caretaker, but she's also kind of his prison warden.
Yeah.
And so that means the relationship that develops between them is necessarily fraught. And the book doesn't shy away from that. I don't think it deals with it with, enough complexity, and the fact that he leaves in the end, which I think is healthier for both of them. She won't end up like Adela in this timeline, I don't think, even if they get back together.
Yeah, I think she's just a very frustrating character. I think until the end, when it recontextualizes a lot of things about her. So the structure of the book, I don't think is clear until the end that she's written it for herself in either her imagined... So the time machine is destroyed at the end, but is the possibility
They know
that
it's not
it can be
permanently
repaired.
destroyed, yes.
Exactly. So she knows it won't work in the moment, but she assumes it will be repaired at some point. And so it's written with the idea perhaps that she can somehow send this information back to herself and make different choices. And so I don't think we really know. I think there's maybe like a you addressed at a few times in the book or something. We don't really know who she's talking to, what she's thinking, and the idea that maybe this has happened many times before, this kind of cyclical, she's making these choices, living this life, doing these things. But I did find her kind of a frustrating character because even though it is looked upon, I think, retrospectively, that the things she's doing aren't the best choices, we watch them happen in the moment, and she's just fully spying on her friends, reporting on them, trying to be kind of this model employee for the ministry.
Yeah. I think that's the key to the character, honestly. She, in the book, there's a point where the narrator talks about how she tried to view her like heritage as something that she can like put on a shelf and then take it down when she needs to use it, and then if it's hurting her, she puts it back on the shelf later. And I feel like she's becoming a willing participant in a government program that clearly does not have the best interests at heart for the people that it is studying, and she is an active participant surveilling and keeping information from these people. And it's interesting to see how she becomes disillusioned with it and how she doesn't by the end of the book. She's kind of at gunpoint forced to kind of reckon with her choices. I believe that she tries to destroy the time machine by just shooting it with a gun, because I believe she's talking to the brigadier, and the brigadier basically says, like, because of all the stuff that's going on, like, London is gone. Like there's no city left. It was incredible for me to come here and see goths hanging out at the park. Like, that was a big deal for me because this city is not here anymore. And she breaks at that moment. She doesn't want to be part of this anymore, and she just shoots up a time machine. Like, it's interesting to see that is kind of the moment, in my mind at least, where she kind of snaps and says, like, I can't do this.
One of the most compelling parts of the reread was where she compares herself to her sister. Her sister is someone who writes very openly about her experiences with racism. It's worth noting our characters are mixed race, white and Cambodian. And our narrator thinks that is despicable. She thinks she's opening up their family to shame. She thinks she's humiliating their mother for describing experiences they've had. And their relationships to sort of generational trauma are so different. And her response, our narrator, is like, if I hold the gun, no one can do this to me. Mm-hmm. Which I don't think is necessarily good, but also is sympathetic. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Mm-hmm. She's a complex character.
I love her as a foil to Semelia, who ends up sort of feeding information to the brigadier and Celise because they tell her that essentially Europe abandons the African continent and leaves it to burn and doesn't take in any refugees. And you're just like, Semelia, you were right this whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty. There's a pretty dark portrait painted of the future. And
yes.
It's an easy thing to see how someone will be immediately radicalized by the living proof of people coming back and saying, look what you did, and then to immediately hate the people who are coming back in time and be like, I got to keep it the same. You can see how people would take to arms pretty quickly about that.
So I know, Kathleen, you had some questions.
I will say, I had a moment while I was reading this book that had me stop, and then a few moments after that had me take a pause. And I started to realize that there was just something kind of strange going on, which I was just wondering if you guys had a similar experience, which was that the metaphors in this book are wild, completely unexpected. And I think one of the things I struggled with is sometimes I feel like the author expected everyone reading it to have the same frame of reference as she had, or maybe in our collective imaginations we would understand what she was getting at, and I would not. So this was just something that I thought was a really distinctive feature of the book that I never see come up in reviews or anything, but they are truly...
Please give an example.
Yeah, we simply must give the listeners an example.
Your argument with the text.
Yeah.
And this is not to say that this will not work for some readers, or that this didn't entirely work for me, but it certainly had me stop and say, wait, what? So... This was the one, I think, this was the moment that I was like, I gotta highlight this in my Kindle, and I gotta revisit this at a later date. Adela took bridge meetings in a soundproof room deep in the ministry's chest. She always arrived first, and we'd find her sitting at the top of a long table like a mannequin awaiting the gift of demonic possession.
I think that's funny. I think that's deliberately funny.
It's very funny. It's bizarre.
It's so
There was
bizarre.
another one that you were talking about earlier about like how your knees were a bunch of boxes of jumping frogs or something like that. And I was like, I don't remember reading that, but if I remembered reading it, I would have been like, what is happening here?
My knees were jumping like a pair of boxed frogs.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I don't know.
I don't like that one as much.
I don't know what's going on with that. I feel bad for the frogs. In that metaphor.
They're very vivid.
Yeah. I definitely didn't notice them as much as you did, but that just might be my reading style where I kind of glaze over things that I'm like, what is that? I'm like, and I just kind of go past them. Like, that one's not for me. But
here's the chapter about starving men in the Arctic.
Yeah.
Take me back.
Yeah. That's what I'm looking
That's
for.
what James is looking for. Which
Cat's like, "Blip," and I'm like, ooh, starving guys in the Arctic.
Listen, I read it through fully the first time. I watched The Terror until I had to stop because it was giving me nightmares. I had enough.
I also had a question too, which is, why is the agency making like a guy from the Victorian era cohabitate with an unmarried woman if that is like wildly out of...
Why do they pair Semelia with the most racist guy?
Yeah.
They're not... I'm not sure if they're like, oh, shock therapy will do it, but like maybe ease into it, gang. This is... What kind of results are you expecting?
They don't care about that. What they care about is judging the health and seeing if these people from the past will make good soldiers. That's it.
Good time assassins.
Though my actual answer to this question is stupid, so bear with me. It's that Adela wants to make sure they still get to live together, so she ensured that in this timeline they still live together.
Well, she got herself vaporized.
So clearly she's
she
good
did
at making
something
decisions.
wrong.
She's good at making decisions. Okay, I have a question.
No.
Why are they... This is a romance trope that I can't stand. So this is not shade at this author specifically, but the jealousy stuff... Just so juvenile to me. I really, truly hate it. In every romance book it appears in, not just this book. So I'm not just picking on this book. This works for a lot of readers. But there's this scene after Graham and our narrator sleep together where she's like asking him who he has had encounters with. And she's like, wait, was it gay? And it was just the most uncomfortable, weird energy. Like, are you really talking like that to people? I don't know.
The jealousy cracks me up because I'm like, those people are long dead if they exist, so I'm not really sure where this is headed. Like,
also, like, not to defend Graham Gore, who's not, a perfect person, but, like, he was clearly really uncomfortable and really sensitive around that topic. You'd think he would be at least a little more considerate.
Very unnecessary.
I like how the book kind of explored the idea of, homosexual gay relationships back in that time period, because they were occurring, and they were certainly occurring a lot on ships, and he's like, that's kind of like, we don't...
Yeah.
Like, you're talking about it. Like, what are you doing? You're not supposed to... We don't talk about this. This is a thing that nobody talks about. And she's like, are you sure you weren't with anyone? And I was seeing red. I was like, I need to not read more romance books.
What she needs to do is just open JSTOR and type in some articles and leave them open on his laptop for him to read at a later time.
Another thing, I don't know, this is more of like a weird complaint, but the history of the future depends upon which 21st century atrocity Gora is introduced to first, which happens and is then reinforced about that this is the cause of why the future starts to change by an argument between Adela and the Brigadier, which is... I thought I was losing my mind when I read that scene, because I was like, wait, that's what does it?
That's what does it.
That's what does it?
It's
the order of operations?
A butterfly flops its wings and you pick which atrocity to tell the time traveler about first. It's crazy as well, because when Adela first learns about it, it's because our narrator just flippantly mentioned an atrocity, and he learned about it that way, instead of being introduced to it the way they were planning on.
Yeah. I don't know. I was kind of bewildered that that was how the future turns, and then also when you shoot the time machine with a gun, obviously that's going to do something. But
that will do something.
I think that one thing that maybe we're getting at is just tonally, this book sometimes feels very lighthearted, fun, romance. And then sometimes it hints at things that are so dark.
Yes.
And then doesn't take the time to explore them, maybe because that would make it an entirely different book. But they're there, they're hinted at. And I think sometimes I'm like, I'd really like to see that more in depth.
I think the author, they were quoting a Terry Pratchett quote about how funny and serious are not the opposite of each other. The opposite of funny is unfunny, and the opposite of serious is unserious. You can have something be funny or light and also have cover serious things, but I just think that some of the stuff in here, I'm not sure, maybe it was like the structure of it or like how it was introduced or how much coverage it got. I do think that sometimes there was a little bit of an imbalance, and I think that's kind of, for me, the problems with this jump out at me at the ending of the book.
Yes. I really do think that last 10%, that last 30, 40 pages is when I was like, okay, I want to speed this up. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there's some good stuff in this book. I will absolutely read what Bradley comes out with next, because I really like her authorial voice overall, despite the weird metaphors.
I'm just saying that they were striking. I'm not trying.
Striking.
They certainly struck you
They
in
struck
some sort of
Kathleen.
way. You're like, whoa.
I really like the way she wrote about nature and other serious topics, like her relationships with her family were really well explored and well realized. I loved the bit where she talked about how scared she was of spiders until her dad made up a bit about them.
Yes.
Do
Oh,
you guys
that was
remember
great.
this? That
Yeah.
was really sweet.
The power
That was
of
really
bits.
good.
The power of bits. The power of funny.
Yes. I think that, yeah, definitely. I'll absolutely be reading the next book the author puts out. It's just, sometimes things aren't just for me, and I was so happy with so much of this book that I did not come away from this angry, which is a lot of the times when I read books that the endings are what lets me down. I come away from them angry. I did not come away from this book angry. I was pretty happy with it.
We didn't even get to talk about some of the like expat versus refugee stuff, but I do want to give a quote that points to that since we're going to start wrapping up. The time travel project was the first time in history that any person had been brought out of their time and into their far future. In this sense, the predicament of the expats was unique, but the rhythms of loss and asylum, exodus and loneliness roll like floods across human history.
It's good.
That's a good quote.
It's a good quote. And yeah, it makes me think of like the interviews that I read with the author, and she would just talk about, to kind of go back a little bit to the here-ness and the there-ness, but the idea of these places that don't exist anymore, but certainly do exist in a certain way. So you can't go back to Victorian England, but that's still very much present in, well, certainly Gore's mind, but in collective imaginations and things like that. So I like that she's touching upon all those things, the things that currently exist, but the things that also feel so real, even though they are not still a place, a thing that you can revisit.
And just the idea of how things that are historical like events to you, or things that you're not directly related to, you don't have that kind of connection to, how those can be so real and visceral to people who were there, whose families experienced them. Like when she's talking, the narrator's talking about like Gore's experiences, and Gore's just like, you're like talking about like letters I wrote, like personal letters, or like I was there and that happened to me, and you're kind of like talking about it as a remove. It just kind of made me stop and think about maybe how I've spoken to people about things. I'm like, oh well, like I didn't know what they were experiencing when I was talking about that.
Yeah, you never know what someone's personal experiences when you talk
Or
about
their family,
those kinds of things. Yeah. Excited to see what she comes out with next.
Yes.
Should we get to read-alikes?
Yes, I think that we should move on to read-alikes.
Okay.
Here. So I've got a read-alike here for people who liked the time travel aspect, maybe wanted a little bit less of the romance, and maybe a little bit less of the thriller. Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. Very popular at the library a couple of years back. If you want another book in which there is a time travel institute and a little bit of kind of conspiracy, this is probably going to be good for you. It's a lot of musings on life, the human condition. Music is a big part of it. I had a great time with this book, and I think the less said about the Sea of Tranquility, the better.
I'm going to recommend another romance time travel book. This is One Last Stop, a Casey McQuiston. This was a really popular book, so I'm sure most of you have heard of it. But if you haven't, this is about a meet cute featuring a girl who's just moved to New York City, and she is having repeated encounters with a woman on her daily subway commute. They're instantly sort of flirting and striking up this connection. Only our narrator, our protagonist, realizes that this woman she's having an encounter with is a time traveler who is trapped on the subway. I think you had another one, James?
Yeah, the maximalist version of time travel romance. This is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Matar and Max Gladstone, which is about Red and Blue, two post-human, post-body, secret agent time travel assassins on opposite sides of a vast, like, interstellar time travel war, who accidentally kind of start a relationship and then fall in love. It's truly wild. It's very short. It is the opposite of this in a lot of ways.
If you, like Kathleen, get really fixated on weird poetic language, don't read it. It's extremely lyrical and poetic. I love that, but it won't be for all readers.
Yes, it's definitely not for all readers, but it is short enough for if you wanted to.
Give it a try. I have 2 more recommendations. The first one is Harriet Tubman, Live in Concert by Bob the Drag Queen. This book is coming out at the end of March, March 25th. I received an advanced reader's copy of this. This is a book about Harriet Tubman coming to our present day and approaching a hip-hop producer to produce an album about her life and legacy. It is just as hilarious and touching and thoughtful as it sounds. Bob the Drag Queen I have followed in comedy for a while, and I was so impressed by the writing in this book. Definitely check it out if you're interested in sort of historical figures and legacy and that kind of thing. And the last one is more sci-fi heavy, I think, than our other recommendations, which is The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. This is a book about a woman who works as a traverser, which means she travels between different universes. However, you can only travel to a universe where your alternate self has died. So she is sort of uncovering these mysteries. It's very plot twist heavy. There's a lot about how ourselves differ in different universes. There's a lot of discussions of class. And there's a plot twist like 30 pages into this book that completely recontextualized a lot of things for me. And I was like fully locked in at that point. Highly recommend if you like science fiction.
Those all sound really good,
Really
Kat.
cool.
So, time to tell you all what we're reading next.
So in March, we're going to be reading our nonfiction pick, which is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Kimmerer is a botanist and a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and she really discusses reciprocity between the human and natural world, drawing on both her scientific knowledge as a botanist and on indigenous cultural traditions from the Potawatomi Nation. She is able to sort of circle this argument around the reciprocity of humanity with nature, instead of sort of a Western framework of the idea of humanity and nature as essentially in conflict with one another. She brings the indigenous perspective of mutual reciprocity, of us giving to the earth and the earth giving back. It's a really beautiful book. I read it back when it first came out, and I was so overjoyed to see how popular it has become in recent years. And I hope that both of you like it.
I'm really looking forward to
I'm
reading
excited
it.
to read it.
Yep.
Until then, thank you all so much.
Thanks for listening, everyone.